Hi everyone, today it's February 14th, Tuesday. Happy Valentine's Day to my viewers if you guys are couples or in relationship. But I'm single and I still A0 in terms of relationship, which is available but have not yet been any relationship before. So this Valentine's Day does not really apply to me. But anyway, again, today it's February 14th, Tuesday. It's a bit of a, not a bit, it's actually a preview of my coming trip back to Sydney, Australia to end my summer break here, mostly in Hong Kong, on a good note because next semester will begin next week. So actually I will be flying in 2 days time. So 2 days time, as in today, it's February 14th, Tuesday. Then 2 days later, February 16th, Thursday, I will be flying from Hong Kong to Sydney with the stop, in Singapore, because although you can fly from Hong Kong directly to Sydney for now, for quite a while, but I will have a stopover in Singapore, aka the Lion City. It's because it's not my suggestion. It's because I have to use my parents' Asia Miles, because they have like several thousands of Asia Miles that were stacked up during COVID, and I have to kind of help them to use it, because if you don't use for some sort of points, it will go expired. So I have to use it, and unfortunately no more redemption for direct flights, no more redemption for Hong Kong directly to Sydney. So I have to, for this reason, I have to make a stop, and the most practical way, it's Singapore. So I will be actually flying from Hong Kong via Singapore to Sydney. Hong Kong via Singapore to Sydney. So talking about the COVID-19 and restriction-wise, Singapore, I'm not like actually traveling in Singapore. I'm not entering Singapore. I'm not clearing arrival immigration to enter Singapore. I'm just transiting only. And at this moment, like as this video goes, Singapore is open to transit travelers such as me with no specific regulations or requirements. So as well as I have an onward flight, which is for my case Singapore to Sydney, I can transit from Hong Kong through Singapore, then to Sydney. Then to Australia, it's a bit of a complicated thing, because when China opened the border quite a while ago, early January, several countries have introduced some sort of COVID-19 restrictions to, because they kind of scared about how China spread COVID-19 to the rest of the world, similarly as what China technically had done at the beginning of the outbreak. So that's why, specifically if you are traveling from China, which includes Hong Kong and also Macau, from January 5th onwards, you will need to do PCR tests or RAT tests 48 hours before. So the PCR test, it's not the free version. You will need to do the paid one that will have a form, like a printed form, that you will need to bring a soft copy or a hard copy before when you check in for your flight, because that's now a requirement. Or you can do a RAT as well, but that needs to be a not self-RAT, that you need to be under some sort of a medical supervision, or of an authorized person. Both acceptable as long as it's within a 48-hour period prior to the day of your scheduled departure. So that applies, because you might ask, well, I'm not traveling from Hong Kong to Sydney if you count my final flight to Australia. But since my originally I'm flying from Hong Kong, even though I've stopped over, I'm transiting in Singapore to Australia, I'll still need to do COVID-19 test 48 hours before my flight. So specifically, I mentioned earlier in the video, February 16th on Thursday, I'll be flying from Hong Kong to Singapore. That includes, specifically during the afternoon. Then after 3-ish hours of stopover in Singapore, then I'll connect the next flight, also you can say the final flight from Singapore to Sydney. So you might ask when I'll need to do. It's when I'm in Hong Kong, as long as after later today, the afternoon, to fulfill within the 48 hour period, then I can board the flight from Hong Kong to Singapore, then also from Singapore to Sydney. So I have to be clear, you don't need to do COVID-19 tests to enter or transit through Singapore, but to Australia, even though you have a stopover in another country, which is, for my case, Singapore, before landing in Australia, specifically also Sydney in my case, I'll still need to do a COVID-19 test. It's a bit annoying, but that's the current COVID-19 restrictions from the Australian government, so you have to do. So there are basically some really important information for this preview video. So again, today it's February 14th, Tuesday. 2 days later, February 16th, Thursday, I'll be flying from Hong Kong via Singapore to Sydney. So I'll need to do COVID-19 tests no more than 48 hours before my flight from Hong Kong to Singapore. Then I'll have a not 4 hours, but at least 3-ish hours stopover transit in Singapore, then from Singapore back to Sydney. By the time I arrive back to Sydney, it's already February 17th, Friday, which is the next day. So remember, there are no time difference between Hong Kong and Singapore. So Hong Kong, it's this time, Singapore, it's this time. But Sydney, Australia, it's 3 hours ahead of Hong Kong and Singapore, which means Hong Kong and Singapore is 3 hours behind of Sydney, Australia. So as long as I adjust my clock, my watch, because phone you can already adjust the time zone automatically, but watch you can't unless you do it by yourself. So basically you have to do it or I would do it on my flight from Singapore to Sydney. So that's a wrap of this preview video from Hong Kong via Singapore to Sydney. Hopefully this video will be useful if you are transiting through Singapore, or if you're traveling elsewhere, regardless from China or Hong Kong, Macau, or not, to Sydney, Australia, for whatever reason. Hopefully this video, I'll put the relevant link in the description down below, so that it will be helpful for you guys. Oh, and I also forget the very last thing. It's upon arrival into Australia, which is Sydney in my case, on February 17, Friday morning. There are no arrival tests. You just need to do one pre-departure test before landing in Australia. That is, for my case, before my flight from Hong Kong to Singapore, because that's the current COVID-19 restrictions, which is in place for more than 1.5 month. But that's a wrap, and I'll see you guys in 2 days time, February 16th on Thursday. Join me on my flight from Hong Kong to Singapore. See ya.